Hello, and welcome everyone to the first podcast for day 32. For day 32, we're going to cover two chapters. Chapter 28, that covers all the protists, and then chapter 31, that covers all the fungi. These are two enormously large groups and two very long chapters, but we're only going to cover very small parts of them. So in the first objective, in the first podcast, we're going to talk about protists. And then we're going to jump to fungi. Now, evolutionarily speaking, we really should put plants next. But we're spending a little less time on both protists and fungi so they fit nicer into one day. But recognize that from an evolutionary perspective, plants evolved before fungi. And we'll come back to plants next week. Then the last three objectives are going to cover aspects of the fungi. But let's go ahead and get started with this first objective on the protists. As we start our discussion of protists, we should come back to this circle of evolution here. Remember, we talked about prokaryotes forming here about 3.5 billion years ago. It wasn't until around 2 billion years ago that single-celled eukaryotes started to form. Just like with the bacteria and archaea that kept evolving for those 3.5 billion years, single-celled eukaryotes also continue to evolve over these 2 billion years. They haven't stopped. This is also about the same time when we first saw the appearance of organelles within these single-celled cells. The appearance of these organelles is really what signifies the beginning of the eukaryotes. This is also the time when that endosymbiont theory occurred, where we had that one ancestral eukaryotic cell engulf that ancestral aerobic bacterium that then provided the eukaryote that ability to respire. And over time, it maintained that bacterium within that cell, and it went on to become the mitochondria. The chloroplast was also formed in a similar way. So now we begin our discussion of the eukaryotes, which evolved about 2.1 billion years ago, or began to evolve 2.1 billion years ago. Let's first begin this discussion by drawing a phylogenetic tree. We have a common ancestor here. I'll just put CA for common ancestor. We then know that the bacteria broke away first. We have our archaea. And then we have our eukarya. And the eukarya can be broken up into 3 kingdoms plus our protists. I'm going to come back to the protists in a moment. But we have our plants, fungi, and then our animals. For now, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and place protists here, because at one time we thought of the protists as being a 4th kingdom, the first kingdom of eukarya. In fact, why don't we draw this? All of these are eukarya, or eukaryotes. But what we have discovered is that the protists here, so let's write protists, are very diverse. And that's just putting it lightly. They are more diverse than the plants, the fungi, or the animals. In fact, what we have learned is that the protists share features. Some protists are more similar to plants, some are more similar to fungi, whereas others are more similar to animals. As a result, it's really difficult for scientists to keep calling protists a 4th kingdom, and because of that, we don't call them a kingdom anymore. Rather, we consider them as multiple kingdoms. So because of this diversity and because of their similarities within it to these different kingdoms, we say they are different kingdoms. Or rather, let's see. We say they are multiple kingdoms. it's possible in a few years we'll end up placing the protists within each of these other three kingdoms. They may continue to remain as multiple kingdoms. This is one of the confounding things about studying biology, that the rules sometimes keep changing. And that's because we gather new evidence. And when we have new evidence, we have to go back and adjust our theories. And go back and adjust the way we previously interpret and go back and adjust the way we had previously interpreted these different the different findings. And that's what's happened here. Molecular evidence has really shed a lot of light onto how we view the protists, and it's highly debated on where they should be placed. So for the purpose of this class, we're going to draw it here, but you should know that they represent multiple kingdoms within this group right here. Because of this, it's really not too surprising that it's difficult to find unique features that are found in all protists that are not found in plants, fungi, or animals. But they do have some things we should talk about. I'm going to go ahead and erase this. So some features of them that you should know. So let's write features of protists. You should know that they are the first eukaryotes. And related to that, they're the first to have organelles. Most are unicellular. However, let's emphasize this word most, because we do see some that form very elaborate colonies, and we also see others that form multicellular organisms. So they're not all unicellular. As I said before, they have these organelles, but many have a unique organelle called a contractile vacuole. Contractile. And I want to show a quick video of this so you can see what it is. So let's step away from the whiteboard. Okay, in this video we're going to show a paramecium. A paramecium is an example of a protist. So we're going to see here's a contractile vacuole, and these are all contractile vacuoles here. And the purpose of a contractile vacuole is to pump out water from the protists. And that's what we're going to see here. You're going to see these slowly disappear, or maybe not too slowly. Let's back up because you just missed one, maybe. This one right here, see how it disappears? That one disappears. And you're going to see them reform because they're going to, once again, absorb water within the cell. But the cell can't keep absorbing this water. It eventually has to pump it out. I think we're going to see this one disappear. Yep, there it goes. Okay, so in that video you saw how the contractile vacuole worked. We should also make a note right under here saying its purpose, and it's to pump out water. I said it while the video was playing, but let's write it down here. Nutritionally, they are also quite diverse. Some are photoautotrophs, with a functional chloroplast. Others are autotrophs, where they have to absorb their nutrients from the environment. And still others are what we call mixotrophs. And this is a new term for us, mixotrophs. And mixotrophs have the best of both. They have chloroplasts, so they can undergo photosynthesis, and so they can rely strictly on the use of CO2 to build larger carbon structures. And they are also autotrophs, that they can absorb nutrients from their environment as well. And the last thing here about the features that you should know is that their reproduction is quite varied. So I'm going to write reproduction. equals either asexual or sexual. And as a take-home point, you should recognize that protists are just a very, very interesting group, and it's hard to classify them. They have some interesting features to them, and they're very diverse. The next thing we need to talk about real briefly is this question on your note-taking guide that asks, what is the origin of land plants? So origin and this is all you need to know, that the green algae which is a protist, gave rise to land plants. And really, we can just say plants. They gave rise to the plants. That's all you need to know about the origin of land plants for this class. All right, let's go ahead and continue on with this objective. I have a couple pictures I need to show you, so I'm going to do the rest of this podcast from the PowerPoint. And so we want to talk a little bit about symbiosis and protists. And we want to talk a little bit about some examples with mutualism and parasitism. Remember, mutualism is when both species in this relationship have a benefit, and parasitism is when only one of them benefits. Some examples of mutualism are photosynthetic dinoflagellates that provide food for animals that build our coral reefs. Another example that your book discussed is the protists that live in the termites' guts. So protists so protists that are living in the termite gut. Now remember, microbes also, bacteria also can live in the guts of termites to help digest wood. But this example here, we're talking about specific protists in the gut of the termite that digest the woody substances. We also see these in cockroaches as well. And here's a picture of the termite gut right here, where we have this protist here, and it's helping digest the wood particles. Next, let's look at parasitism. And again, this is when one species benefits and the other is harmed. So a good example of this is the protist, the Plasmodium, which is a protist that causes malaria. So the protist is able to complete its life cycle in us and survive, but as a result, it causes malaria in human populations. Here's a picture of a forest that's being attacked by various forest pathogens that are protists. So you can see the dead trees here that are wiping through here. So we could write forest pathogen. So it would be good for you to know a few of these examples. All right, let's move on to the last topic of this objective and discuss how protists affect the world that we live in and how every form of life on Earth requires them. And we want to talk about two different ways. The first is that photosynthetic protists account for approximately 30% of all photosynthesis. We haven't talked about photosynthesis specifically yet, but these are reactions that occur in the chloroplast of photosynthetic protists and photosynthetic bacteria and plants. It's important for many reasons, but to name one of the main importance is that it generates the oxygen that aerobic organisms require. And so if we didn't have the photosynthetic protists, we would decrease the amount of photosynthesis, the amount of oxygen available to aerobic organisms by 30%. And this seems like that would not be a good strategy. Many protists are autotrophs. And these autotrophs are what we call producers. Producers are typically going to be our autotrophs. So we know that protists are autotrophs, photoautotrophs. Some of them are anyhow. Producers are located near the bottom of our food chains. They're incredibly important. They provide the food necessary for heterotrophs so that heterotrophs can survive. As we see in this figure here, we have prokaryotic producers and we have protist producers here. As you look at these arrows just say that they provide energy to the plankton that are herbivores, and they also provide energy for other consumers. As we see in this picture here, we have the killer whale, penguins, and various fish. If we lose these producers here, either the protists or the prokaryotic ones, we can see that upstream here, the plankton, vertebrate organisms here will all suffer. What keeps these producers in balance, particularly these protists, is the availability of various nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and iron. And usually things stay in check pretty well, but humans can drastically alter these. And when humans do this in various ways, it affects the producers here. And then when these producers are affected, everything upstream is also affected. And so how can we upset this balance as humans? The way that your book describes it is talking about fertilizers. So if we have some farm over here, and let's just draw the boundary of the sea here, and this farm here uses fertilizers on their crops, even far away from the sea, that can have an effect on these producers because the groundwater can collect some of these excess fertilizers and transport them to the sea. This will upset this balance of these nutrients necessary for these producers to survive. And as a result, again, as we said before, it ultimately has downstream consequences to other organisms as you move up the tree here. Okay, that ends our first podcast for this day. If you have any questions, please make sure you contact us and we'll do our best to answer all your questions. All right, see you in class. Bye.